repeating as Cup champions is difficult. And there are many reasons why it almost never happens. The Penguins did it in 2016, 2017, and they were the first team to do it since the Red Wings decades earlier. And the reason's simple. Going through that really, really tough 4 rounds 2 years in a row, it is hard in a league with so much parity. The physical toll it takes. Now, at this stage, while everything is on hold and we're not sure what's going to happen, the St. Louis Blues are in a very tough position. They looked like, of teams that have won Stanley Cups over the last decade, they had as much of a chance as any to perhaps repeat. To which, of course, the Capitals would say, yeah, we looked pretty good last year too. So there's no way of telling until you actually play the games what's going to happen. But for St. Louis, they had 94 points, 42, 19, and 10 record. Last year, 45, 28, and 9 for 99 points. In the year before, 44, 32, and 6 for 94 points. So it's very telling that already they had the same amount of points as they had 2 years ago when they were a pretty good team. And they were only 5 points away from what they had last season when they went on to win a Stanley Cup. And everybody makes, the point that they were last in the NHL in January and they went on this great run, which is somewhat true, but it's also somewhat deceptive in that St. Louis was already a good team. They were widely seen as underperforming in 2018, 2019. There wasn't any, well, we knew they'd be bad in that group. There was more of a, I can't believe St. Louis isn't winning more. Then Berube takes over, and slowly but surely they got it together, and then suddenly they went on a huge run, and now we're talking about them as the defending Stanley Cup champions. Now, if we don't end up playing anything this summer, and if they don't end up finding a way to fix to make this work, they're left with a challenge next year of trying not to fall back. Now, they picked up Justin Falk just in case they lose somebody else off their roster, and that somebody else would be Alex Pietrangelo. Now, when you look at their UFAs this summer, Brouwer, who came in on a professional tryout because everybody was injured, so they brought in Troy Brouwer. Pietrangelo's on the list, and I'm not sure how they find the money to keep this team together. But there is enough money to maybe make it work depending on where the cap comes in. Marco Scandella, likely just a pure rental this year. Jay Bouwmeester, I believe that his career is probably finished based on what has happened with him, and I wish him all the best, but I don't think we see him play hockey again. I think for his own health and safety, I don't think we see him play hockey again. Now, on the restricted free agent front, they've got Delarose, who has arbitration rights, Blais, arbitration rights, McEachern, also arbitration rights, and Vince Dunn. Now, of the 4, 2 of those are really easy to get done. Whether it's McEachern or Delarose, they'll likely take near league minimum to stick around. Sammy Blais, I would argue Blais' physical game is important, and they miss it when he's not in the lineup. I would argue you can give him a bit of a raise, and Vince Dunn has been absolutely fantastic. So, Dunn's going to eat into some of that cap, and currently they're at $73.8 million spent for next season. One of the reasons, too, that it's very hard to maintain your spot at the top of the league or as a cup contender is the cap. Everybody's playing well. You've got a pretty good team. Everybody knows it. And so the asking prices for some of these guys when they're restricted free agents or unrestricted, they go up. And it gets harder and harder to keep that team together. And that's kind of how the cap system is built to work. The NHL seems to really enjoy that part of this, and for me as a fan, I really enjoyed dynasties back in the day. I didn't necessarily cheer for the team that was the dynasty, but it still made things interesting when it was, all right, this team's won 3 in a row. Can they win 4? Oh, they did. The Islanders, right? So I still remember the Islanders' 4th in a row and how important and special that felt. But at the same time, I do understand the NHL's need to make it so that everybody has a chance kind of thing, and they want to do that without making it too watered down. But the cap is definitely in part to make sure that you don't have all the rich teams spend exorbitant amounts of money that the teams that don't make as much money can't. And also the cap is designed to keep things as even keel as possible. And it does reveal who the good general managers are, as it did with St. Louis last year. Now, with best contract, I went with David Perron. He's only costing them $4 million through 2022. he came back on a very team-friendly deal. And honestly, he has outperformed his contract. So good on him. Now, the worst contract, this was actually tough. St. Louis does not overpay. Last year, you could have argued Jake Allen. You could have looked at Jake Allen's money and said, you know what, it's going to be hard to keep Bennington. But it really hasn't been. Bennington didn't ask for an exorbitant contract either after winning the Stanley Cup. Clearly not nervous in contract negotiations. So I went with Steen as the worst contract. That's $5.75 million through next year. And that was the worst contract I could find. And that's the one that if they want to make room to keep Pietrangelo, re-sign Dunn, that's the one they would probably be looking to move. Where they would be trying to see where he would fit and who he could go to. And people mention when I talk about this stuff like, well, if somebody has a no trade or might have a no trade or what. No trade clauses are just designed to make sure the players aren't just traded wherever. So you can go to a player and say, hey, can you waive your no trade? I've got a deal with Philly. And they might go, yeah, sure. You might go to them and say, I've got to get you to waive your no trade. I'm going to trade you to San Jose. And they might go, I don't want to waive it for that. So that's part of what the no trade is designed to do. Not necessarily a I'm staying here for the rest of my career thing as much as a I want to say and where I'm going thing. Which I think it was born out of a good place by the players. It was. Because, players, I think it's easy now to look at players and see how highly paid they are and say, well, this is, they're getting paid too much. But I still remember when they were kind of treated like cattle. And where I came into watching hockey, and they were just being traded off, and there really wasn't any consideration for that kind of where they wanted to be or what they wanted to do. Nobody really cared. That was still way better than back in, say, the 50s or 60s, how hockey players were treated. And so, the poor spirits between the NHLPA, once it was allowed to be formed, and the NHL, it's well-grounded. Now, for rookies, the interesting thing with St. Louis is they don't really have a need for a lot of rookies. I would expect Jordan Kyrou to take a larger role next year. I would expect to see Robert Thomas take a larger role next year. St. Louis does very well at bringing in new guys and getting them into the system and making sure that everything is pretty stable. And when you look at who's leaving, like, they would have a hard time replacing Pietrangelo, absolutely agree, but they have a really solid blue line. For instance, when I was picking best contract, I kind of wanted to put up Colton Parayko there. I also kind of thought, O'Reilly's contract's fantastic. Hey, check it out. Shen signed for an extended long-term deal that may end up being a little bit rich, but they keep Shen for another, 8 years after this one. So they're pretty smart with their money. And they're pretty smart when it comes to bringing in rookies when they're ready. Now, the most likely to come in, if there's a forward opening, I would think Clem Costin gets that spot. And he's definitely marinated for a while. They've been bringing him along slowly. We'll see. Nico Mikkola. I did like him in the call-up that he had this season. I think that he showed that he's pretty darn close to NHL ready. And he's a blue liner. So if they lose Scandella, and likely do, I can't see them having Bouwmeester in the lineup next year, as I already stated. Pietrangelo's on his way out, in all likelihood anyways, unless they can get rid of a contract like Steen's or free up some money somewhere. At $73.8 million spent under the cap, and they've already got 4 restricted free agents to sign, at league minimum, that takes you up to about $76 million. Well, then you've got, $8 million at most left to spend on Pietrangelo and get rookies into the lineup. It gets tough. It gets really, really tough to see how they keep Pietrangelo around. Again, they may be able to move money around, but with a guy like Mikkola in the system, if he can play number 6 and you can bump other guys up, they do have an excellent overall depth on that blue line. Jake Wallman as well may end up finding his way into the lineup. He's 24 years of age, so it's kind of a now or never situation with him. And Ville Husso. I've got Ville Husso on the board. Just in case Jake Allen has another really solid season next year, and suddenly his contract looks a little more attractive. So he had a pretty good run this year, especially on the road. He was excellent. And if he does that again, maybe a team like San Jose comes calling and says, we need some help in net. Can we work something out? Husso, who was extended recently for $750,000 a year for another, I think it's two or 3 years. That's a very team-friendly contract if Husso comes up and plays backup to Binnington. It would change things a lot. You've got to think Binnington would probably play a lot more games if Husso's the backup instead of Binnington, or instead of Allen. But 2 years ago at this time, who was Binnington? So St. Louis may very well be ahead of the game, even still. And we could in a year be talking about, they traded Allen. Can't believe they did it, but Husso's been great. So we'll see what happens. But I do like St. Louis's chances of staying pretty darn solid next year. I think they'll stay in the contenders conversation next year. Another championship, it's quite possible. If they figure out a way to make something happen this summer where we can have some kind of a playoff, it could work. And next season, I could see it. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. It means a lot. And remember, stay safe, wash your hands, and I'll talk to you again soon.